When I was a young guy, probably 10, 12 years old, we used to have a lot of people that hung out at our house. Actually, for as long as I can remember, there were a lot of people that hung out at our house. And there were always a smattering of kids of all ages, from 3 or 4 years old up to early teens. And that's just kind of the way I grew up, always with a little herd of kids around. And generally speaking, the kids would migrate one way in the house and the parents would migrate another way in the house. And there would always be this one phrase. And you would hear it over and over again. I don't know if kids use it as much today. Maybe if you have toddlers, you've experienced this recently, but I used to hear it all the time. You're not the boss of me. You're not the boss of me. You can't tell me what to do. Or, I'm telling my daddy. And so you get this power struggle among people who obviously have no power. They would fight over toys. We would fight over who was going to sit next to who for lunch, or who had red Kool-Aid and who had orange Kool-Aid. It was the silliest stuff that we fought over. But that declaration, you're not the boss of me, that I want to be independent, I want to be in charge, nature of the human heart has been evident in all of us from day one. Now today I want to look at a leader who in Scripture goes through an unbelievable transformation. And he's both trained in the system of the world and that he's trained in the system of God. The character we're looking at today is Moses. His story is phenomenal. You'll have to go back and read through the life of Moses, but he starts off born when all of the Hebrew children were supposed to be executed, and so his mother, to save his own life, puts him in a basket and sends him off down the Nile River, hoping that he would be found by someone. Now, she kind of stacked the deck, if you want to think about it that way, because she kind of knew who was going to be in the river bathing and doing laundry at that time, and who the servants were and who the important person was. And so she kind of pointed her child, kind of like, hey, God, make this basket go right over there to Pharaoh's family. And so Pharaoh's daughter sees this baby and says, there's a baby in that basket. Oh, but who's going to raise it? And, of course, Moses' mother to the rescue, a servant of the house of Pharaoh, said, I will. And so by the hand of God, by the grace of God, she gets to raise her own child, but raising him in Pharaoh's house. So he learned from day one all the way up what it's like to be a ruler, what it's like to have wealth, what it's like to be in the most powerful country in the world. As an Egyptian, Moses was raised as an Egyptian when Egypt had all the power in the world. But as Moses got older, he began to identify with his own heritage, his own culture as a Hebrew. And as he grew in that stature and position as an Egyptian, but in his own awareness of his original culture, there became a conflict inside his heart. And God began to call him and say, I've got a different mission for you. It was really hard for him to go through that process. In fact, there was a time that because he felt that struggle and he wanted to see the Hebrews set free, he actually killed a man. And then when he tried to break up two of his Hebrew brothers from a fight, they said, what, are you going to kill us too? And I think it was at that moment that he began to realize, this isn't going to work. And yet, even then, that same little cry of the Egyptian that he fought and killed, unintentionally, but killed, of the Hebrews, it was still that same cry. You're not the boss of us. You're not in charge of us. What makes you think you can tell us what to do? What, are you going to kill us if we don't obey you? That same childish behavior kind of rooted itself into the culture. So fast forward another 40 years, and Moses has been cast out of Egypt because of the killing of the Egyptian, and he's wandering in the desert, and he has an encounter with a bush. Not George W. Bush or George H.W. Bush, just a bush, just a shrub brush. And he notices that this bush is burning, but there's no smoke. There's no consumption of the bush. The bush is on fire, but it's not being burned up, which is kind of creepy. And then the bush starts to talk to him. And I'm sure at some point he was rubbing his eyes and he was thinking, what did I eat last night? Or how much have I had to drink already today? But as this conversation between him and the bush took place, he began to realize that that bush was the manifest presence of the glory of an almighty God. A God that he had heard about through his Hebrew heritage. A God that had been laughed and mocked at and scorned by his Egyptian heritage. But a God who took time to step down out of heaven and manifest himself in the presence of Moses and say, listen, I need you to do something for me. As Moses is being prepared by God for the work that he's going to do, Moses begins to build a relationship with God like none other. As God called him to do the work, he prepared him to do the work. He prepared him through conversation. I don't know about you, but I've had mentors in my life that sometimes the things they say to me, they hurt my pride. They make my brain think, you're not the boss of me. Why are you telling me to do that? And yet, because I've submitted myself to them as mentors, as leaders in my life, as people who have the right to say to me, you're wrong about that. You need to rethink that. You need to look at that again. Because I've allowed myself to be taught by them, because I've asked them to lead me, to teach me, to grow me up, to mature me. Because I've asked for that. My submission to their authority gives them the right and the power to be the boss of me. Now, they don't make every decision for me, but they do speak into my life when I'm off track. They do speak into my life when I'm making a bad decision. They do speak into my life when I need to rethink something, or when I've read or studied something and I've misunderstood it. And Moses had that, obviously, in the house of Pharaoh, and he had that in his Hebrew family, but more than that, he had that from God. Think about that for a minute. What if the mentor who spoke into your life when you messed up, what if the person who was always there for you, the person who was always at the ready for you, the person who looked at everything you did, what if that person was Almighty God? Would they ever be wrong? Would they ever give you instructions that didn't work? Would they ever tell you to do something that wasn't going to be in your best interest, both short-term and long-term? I mean, sure, God gives us instructions to do things, and we go, that makes no sense to me. God manifests himself in our life like a burning bush, and we go, what is that? But when we have the Almighty speaking into our lives, making decisions with us and for us, that changes everything. Now, I want to fast forward. And we're all the way forward now into the camp at Hazareth and in Numbers chapter 12. There's a whole lot of history that has taken place, the parting of the Red Sea, the gathering of the people of Israel and moving them out of Egypt. All of those things have taken place. And now we're kind of in the new form of government. A promised land has been promised, but not yet received. A deliverance has been promised and has been received. And in the interim between the deliverance and the promise, which is where most of us live as believers, when we surrender our life to Christ, we are past the deliverance, but not yet in the promise. And in that desert, in that wilderness, we often want to speed up time. We want to get this over as quick as we can. We want to move from deliverance to promise right away. And God said, but there's things that I need to do. I need to work out in you. And in that season, I still need submission. I still need you to listen to me, and I need you to listen to the leaders that I've put over you. In Numbers chapter 12, we pick it up. Miriam and Aaron talked against Moses behind his back because of the Cushite wife. He'd married a Cushite woman. They said, is it only through Moses that God speaks? Doesn't he also speak through us? Let me translate that for you. You're not the boss of me, right? Isn't he saying basically the same thing? You're not the boss of me. God overheard their talk. Now that's a little bit extreme to say because God's listening to everything and God's watching everything. But in this moment, it's like when you hear the children playing in the other room and you hear someone say something like, I'll just kill you. And you think, whoa, wait a minute, where did that come from? I mean, you could be in the middle of washing dishes and you hear a phrase like that and you drop everything. You're like, excuse me? And I think in this moment, God was like, excuse me? Does he also speak through us? Are you questioning whether or not Moses speaks on my behalf? I'm God. Don't I get to choose who I speak to? Don't I get to choose who I speak through? So is it only through Moses that God speaks? Doesn't he also speak through us? And God said, excuse me? But say that again. Please, I dare you. Say that again. Really, say it again. Now the man Moses was quietly humble, more so than anyone living on earth. I'm guessing Moses wrote that. God broke in suddenly on Moses and Aaron and Miriam, and he said, come out, you three, to the tent of meeting. The three went out. God descended in a pillar of cloud and stood in the entrance to the tent. You go from washing dishes or making dinner or whatever you're doing, and you hear this conversation in the back of the room. Well, I'll just kill you, or I'm going to slap you, or I'm going to do whatever else. And whatever that declaration is, whatever that challenge is, that doesn't just speak to the person they're talking to, the kids amongst themselves. But it's about to have a big kind of difference in life. And you dry your hands off. And you straighten your shirt up a little bit. And you walk over and you go, listen, you three, you need to come over here with me. We need to have a talk. We're going to step outside. Or we're going to step in the bedroom. If you've ever been that toddler who said something they weren't supposed to in a fine restaurant, and mom says, we're going to the bathroom. Ooh, you just get chills, don't you? You know that when she says we're going to, or a dad says we're going to the bathroom, man, life ain't going to be the same. And that's what happened right here for Moses and Aaron and Miriam. God said, come here for a minute. We need to talk about this little argument you're having. And he brought them to the tent of meeting, and he said, listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. You know you're in trouble when Dad's not yelling anymore and he's gone to whispering. When he says, look, come here. Come here real close. Don't ever say that again. I never want to hear those words come out of your mouth again. Those are the kind of things that you better let that settle into your heart and your soul, because it will change your life for the better. When you take certain things out of your vocabulary, when you take certain things out of your thought process, when your mindset no longer allows you to look at the people above you and go, I don't have to listen to them. You're not the boss of me. Why are you the one making all the decisions? God says, listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you. If there's a prophet of God among you, I make myself known to him in visions. I speak to him in dreams. I do not do it that way with my servant Moses. I speak to him intimately, in person, in plain talk without riddles. He ponders the very form of God. So why did you show no reverence or respect in speaking against my servant Moses? Now, if we're thinking about the selfish human nature, the nature that would be in me, I've had those moments where I've had employees. When I was a manager of a print shop, I had an employee that on a regular basis, I would tell him to do something, and he would look at me and go, well, that's not the way we do it. Well, I understand before I became your boss, that may have not been the way you do it, but that's the way I want it done, and that's the way I want it done, so get it done. And we had a constant headbutting. There were a couple of times that he was so convinced that he was supposed to have the job that I got, that he would do anything to sabotage it. I would give him a project and say, this is going to take you a few hours, but I need you to stay on it until it's done. And I would look up and he'd be gone to lunch. And I'm like, that job has a 5 o'clock deadline. Where is he? And he would take a 2-hour lunch, 2.5-hour lunch. I'm like, where'd you go? He's like, I was with so-and-so. Well, so-and-so just happened to be the district manager who was over another store, but they were pals. And so the other guy was allowing him to subvert my authority in my own shop. I couldn't get my own work done because I couldn't count on the guy who was supposed to be my assistant manager. This went on for several months. And so one day he came in and just started back talking and mouthing and telling me that I didn't know what I was doing, and he had a little alcohol on his breath after lunch, and I said, you're fired. Get out of my store. Well, where do you think he went? He went straight to the district manager, who called me and said, you don't have the authority to fire him, you didn't hire him, and blah, 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 blah. So this went back and forth for a couple of hours. The following day, I get a call from the CEO and the COO of the company. And they said, we need to see you for lunch. So I went for lunch, and when I show up there, it's the CEO, it's the CFO, it's the district manager, and it's this assistant manager. And we sat down at the table, and they said, tell us what the problem is. And so I started to speak, and the assistant manager just went off the deep end and said everything that was on his mind. And I sat as patiently and quietly as I could. When he was done talking, the district manager said, see what he's having to put up with? And the CEO looked at the district manager, looked at me, looked at the assistant manager and said, yes, I see exactly what he's having to put up with. And I would have called it insubordination as well. And I would have fired him as well. And so you can either do the termination paperwork for him or give me your resignation at the same time. And in the same way that God stood up for Moses in this moment, my CEO stood up for me and said, I don't need this in my organization. I think my store manager made a good call. The decision he made, he has the authority to make. And if you're not okay with his decision, then you're not okay with my decision, and that means you need to find another place to work. God said, then the anger of God blazed against them. Why do you show no respect or reverence in speaking against my servant Moses? This is the leader that I've appointed. Do you understand? I spend personal time with him. I don't talk to him in mysteries. I don't hang out with this guy just for kicks and giggles. We're not making comic books together, people. We're talking face to face, plain and clear. If he's coming to you with instructions, he got them from me. If Moses is telling you in this camp what you should be doing, he got it from me. And I don't need this silliness from you. The anger of God blazed against them, and then he left. And when the cloud moved off from the tent, Miriam had turned leprous, her skin like snow. Aaron took one look at Miriam, a leper. He said to Moses, please, master, please don't come down so hard on us for our foolish and thoughtless sin. Please don't make her like a stillborn baby coming out of its mother's womb with half of its body decomposed. Now, here's the heart of a good leader. And if you're serving under a leader in a capacity like this, and a moment like this happens, and you realize, I've spoken ill of my leader. I'm not doing this with honor. I'm not doing my job the way that I should be. And your leader doesn't react like this, it's probably best that you move on anyway. Moses prayed to God. Miriam and Aaron had spoken against Moses, had defamed him, had questioned his authority, had pounded on his ability to lead. And God himself stepped in and said, listen, this is my guy. This is the guy I put in this place. Trust him to do what he's supposed to be doing, because he's getting his information from me. And when God brought his anger against Miriam, Moses prayed. I'm afraid I might have been kind of like I was feeling, and thankfully I didn't act this way at lunch that day, but I felt very, very victorious. I felt very vindicated. I felt like, yes, finally somebody's got my back on this. I've been fighting this guy for months. Finally, somebody stood up and went, that's the way it ought to be. Yes, I win. Moses prayed. Aaron said, please don't let her die of this leprosy. And Moses stood up for his people. That's a leadership lesson that is probably one of the hardest in the world to teach, and it's called protecting down. And that's when you turn to the people above you and you say, listen, I know my team messed up. I know they did. And I know it's going to be costly. And I know it's a bad thing. But I love my team. I care about my team. I want my team to succeed. So give us the tools we need to succeed. Give us the help we need to succeed. He prayed to God. Please, God, heal her. That's not a 45-minute prayer. It's just a prayer. God, please heal her. Please heal her. And God answered Moses. If her father had spat in her face, wouldn't she be ostracized for 7 days? Quarantine her outside the camp for 7 days, then she can be readmitted to the camp. If you're a leader of any capacity at any level, there are 3 things that I want you to keep in mind. Number 1, you are under authority. Every leader answers to somebody. In this illustration we're looking at today, Aaron and Miriam were leaders within the camp. They were highly recognized as right there at the top. But their inability to submit themselves to their leader put them in danger. But even Moses didn't just make up ideas on his own. He didn't just come up with this stuff in his sleep. The ideas of leading the children of Israel out of Egypt, leading them across the Red Sea, leading them into the desert, leading them toward the Promised Land, everything he was doing, he was under authority. He answered to God. Every leader at every level answers to someone. That's number one. Number two, you don't have to seek your own vindication. If the system is set up right, if your leaders above you and your team beneath you understand your role and you're acting in that role, you do not need to seek your vindication. There will not be a time that you'll have to go, hey, but what about me? Because if you're under your authority and you're doing what they tell you to, protecting down will also mean that they're going to speak to you and through you to your crowd, to your team. And your oversight will speak to that problem and help solve it. That's what good leaders do. And thirdly, if you're a good leader and a humble leader, not only do you not seek vindication, you don't revel in it. You don't glory in it. You don't wallow in your success. I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone wallow in their success until opportunity has passed them by. My friends, success is going to come, and when you're a leader who's under authority, listening, especially listening to God. It's nice to have leaders around you who are people you can trust, mentors who speak into your life. But when you're listening to God, when God's telling you, wait, hang on, all right, now go. Go as fast as you can. Let God direct that momentum and that energy and that passion. All of those things God directed are going to make a gigantic difference in your life. But just like Moses, even here, God said, all right, I'm done with her. She's got leprosy. She's not going to submit to you. She's not going to be a part of this team. She's not going to follow the instructions that I've given through you. She's done. She's out. I'm finished. How many times did God say to Moses, I'm just going to kill him? And Moses was like, hang on. Hang on. I think they're redeemable. I think we can fix this. See, a good leader doesn't revel in vindication, nor do they reach that moment of success and go, I win, and let everyone else perish. Moses stood up for his team. He went, hey, hang on, God, give her a second chance. I think we can fix this. And if you're a leader who leads like Moses, a leader who leads like Christ, how many times did Christ say, I would have done anything for you? He wept over Israel. He wept over Lazarus. His heart was broken in the garden. Anything that I can do to bring them back to you, God, that's what I want. My challenge for you today is that you would lead like that you would remain under authority, that you would protect up and protect down, that you would allow your team to realize, listen, I can't tell you everything the boss has told me, but I'll tell you everything he told me I can tell you, because I want to be as transparent as I can. And then you got to take up for your team. You got to be willing to say, give them a second chance. And if your heart is so hard toward your team, toward your people, toward the lost, that you'd revel, yes, I win, and revel in your victory, wallow in your successes, rather than remain heartbroken for those who are gone astray. God's still got some work to do. When your heart is broken for your team, when your heart is broken for absolutely strangers, when your heart is broken for those people out there that you don't even technically serve or answer to. Moses was a quietly humble man. That's what made Moses a great leader. Bring your humility before God. Listen closely and love people. And you'll be a great leader. I'm J Loren Norris, and you've been watching Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.